Hello, I am Mrs. Edwards, and today we're going to be using your calculator to evaluate trig functions. It's really important today that you actually grab your calculator and enter these in as we go to make sure that you are getting the same answer. Sometimes entering trig functions can be a little bit tricky. So now that you've got your calculator, enter in the sine of 30 degrees. Now, if you entered in the sine of 30 and you ended up getting approximately 0.9880316, oh, darn it, that is not the correct answer. Some of you know your unit circle and know that the answer to sine of 30 degrees is just the y-coordinate there at 30 degrees, and that should be a positive answer. That answer there does not seem reasonable. What you need to ask yourself is, what mode are you in? You should be in degree mode. Notice the sine of 30 degrees. We see degrees there. So if you grab your calculator and make sure you're in degree mode and type in the sine of 30, you are going to end up getting instead the correct answer, which is 0.5. Let's go ahead and elaborate on that just a little bit. You might be asking yourself, how do I know what mode that I'm in? It's as simple as asking yourself the question, do I see a degree symbol? If you do not see a degree symbol, then you are not in degrees. You are in radian mode. So please be sure anytime you are trying to find the answer to a trig function that you ask yourself, what mode are you in? I'm going to tell you a sad story before moving on to the next examples in hopes that someone can never tell this sad story about you. I had a friend who walked into a math exam, and it was a pretty long test, and they had a lot to do on that test, so they were rushing a bit. And as they were going through the test, their answers didn't seem to be reasonable. And they just couldn't think what they were doing wrong because they felt like they were, going through all the steps correctly. It turned out when they walked out of the exam, they were like, oh my gosh, I was in the wrong mode. And yes, it is a sad ending to that story. They failed their first exam in that class because they were in the wrong mode. So don't let that happen to you. I often have students, high school students, that when they're going back and forth between AP Physics, which is not calculus based, and calculus, maybe AP Calc BC, and they're going back and forth between those two classes, when they're in their physics class, they are more often than not in degree mode. But when you walk over to calculus, they are more often than not in radian mode. So again, anytime you pick up a calculator, it's usually prominently displayed on the screen itself, and you'll see DEG for degrees or RAD for radians. But make sure you know what mode your calculator is in. Scientifics default to degree mode and graphing calculators to radian mode, but you can still switch between the two. Here's another one for you to try. Please be sure, again, to pick up your own calculator and make sure that you are getting the correct answer. So let's say you grab your calculator and you enter the cosine of pi, and you end up getting -1. Well, darn it, you need to be sure to ask yourself, what mode am I in? The cosine of pi degrees is in degree mode. And if your calculator was in degrees, then you would have gotten instead approximately 0.998497. This is one that often trips students up because they see pi and they immediately associate pi with radians. But pi is just a number, 3.14, etc. And if we go to an angle measure of only 3 degrees, that's a teeny tiny angle. Pi in radians is a half circle. Okay, so we're only finding the cosine of 3 degrees, a very small angle measure. So one more time, I think it deserves being said again. How do you know if you are in degree mode or you are in radian mode? Simply ask yourself the question, do I see a degree symbol? And if you see a degree symbol, you are in degree mode, and if you do not, you are in radian mode. Here's another one that looks almost exactly the same, but let's see if you can get the answer. Cosine of pi. Notice this time when we enter cosine of pi and get -1, we do have the correct answer because we do not see a degree symbol, so we know we're in radians. So when we grab that calculator, cosine of pi in radians does equal -1. In this example, you want to evaluate the secant of pi over 3, but you might be thinking, wait a second, where's secant? If you're on a scientific calculator, chances are you are not going to find a secant button. Now, if you are on a graphing calculator, if you do a little bit of searching, you might be able to find, buried underneath one of those keys, secant. But frankly, it's just much faster to know your reciprocal functions. Remember, the reciprocal function for secant is cosine. So if we knew the answer to cosine of this angle measure, we would just want to flip it over. Well, what flips a number over? Like what flips a fraction over? 1 divided by 2/3 is 3 over 2. So ultimately, to find the answer to secant of pi over 3, you just want to take 1 divided by the answer to cosine of pi over 3. So grab your calculator and give that a try. Take 1 divided by the cosine of pi over 3. Now remember, we do not see a degree symbol, so make sure that you are in radian mode. All right, so you pick your calculator up. 1 divided by the cosine of pi over 3 equals 2. That should make sense to you because at pi over 3, cosine is 1/2. So 1 divided by 1/2 is 2. Little side note there, see that little set of parentheses. When you start typing in to your calculator 1 divided by the cosine, immediately your calculator puts a set of parentheses there. So we type in 1 divided by cosine parenthesis pi divided by 3 close parenthesis enter. In this example, we want to take 3 over the cosine of 74 degrees plus 2. So grab your calculator and see if you can get the right answer. We've got a lot going on here. First off, we see 74 degrees. Since you see a degree symbol, you know that you are in degree mode. Now that you have your calculator in degree mode, you might be looking at your calculator keys and saying, where is cotangent? On a scientific calculator, you are often not going to see the button cotangent, and even when you're working on your graphing calculator, it is that cotangent is buried within those various buttons. So you just want to use the reciprocal function idea. Tangent and cotangent are reciprocals of one another. So you're simply going to replace the cotangent of 74 degrees with 1 over the tangent of 74 degrees. All right, next, you go ahead and try to enter that in your calculator. 3 divided by 1 divided by tangent 74 plus 2 equals. If you enter that straight across, you are not going to end up with the correct answer. He's saying, Bob says 1.312, but I got 2.860. I often refer to the back of the book as Bob, and we know everyone feels so much better when they match the answer. They like to be twins with Bob. So, am I missing something here? Is there something that I should have done? Well, Well, parentheses. Ah, yes, parentheses. Anytime you want to enter just with one keystroke straight across into your calculator something complicated, you want to keep in mind that a good rule of thumb is to put a set of parentheses around the numerator and a set of parentheses around the denominator. In this particular case, if you didn't put a set of parentheses around the numerator, which is just 3, you're going to end up with the correct answer. But if you're in doubt, put a set of parentheses around the numerator and the denominator. But I need that extra set of parentheses right there. So now if I type into my calculator 3 divided by parenthesis 1 divided by the tangent of 74 plus 2, close parentheses, enter, well then we are going to end up matching the back of the book, 1.312, and this is the correct answer. In this example, we want to find the sine squared of 22 degrees. And really the question is, what is being squared? It is not the 22 degrees. This notation is very compact, and you often find it, especially in some of the identities, like they might say sine squared of x plus cosine squared of x equals 1, which is one of the Pythagorean identities. But when you actually go to do the problem, you do not want that squared to be in that location. That really means the sine of 22 degrees multiplied by the sine of 22 degrees. So ultimately, I'm going to write the sine of 22 degrees to the power of 2. Just kind of some foreshadowing. If you are in precalculus and later be taking calculus, as soon as you see something that has an exponent where it's trapped inside of there, the very first thing you should do is rewrite it as the whole thing to that power. You'll be able to perform the calculus on it as well. It's kind of like before calculus, you often write the square root of x. But when you get to calculus, your very first step when you see that is to write it as x to the 1/2. There's just certain notation that works better for a specific purpose. Okay, so then you grab your calculator, degree mode, sine of 22 degrees, in parentheses to the second power, and we end up getting about 0.14033. Let's do just one more of those where we also have to use a reciprocal identity. So I have here 5 cosecant to the 4th of 35 degrees. The first thing you want to do is rewrite that as cosecant of 35 degrees to the 4th power. Now, that cosecant, we don't have the key cosecant on our calculator, so we're just going to replace cosecant of 35 degrees with the reciprocal identity. So that is equivalent to 1 over the sine of 35 degrees. Now you can enter in your calculator 5 parenthesis 1 divided by the sine parenthesis 35 close parenthesis caret or to the power of 4 enter, and you're going to end up getting approximately 46.19605. I highly recommend that you again pick up your calculator and make sure that you get a matching answer there. In summary, things to keep in mind when you are evaluating trig functions, ask yourself, what mode am I in? If you see a degree symbol, you know you are in degree mode, and if you do not see a degree symbol, you are in radian mode. You want to utilize those reciprocal functions to evaluate trig functions like cosecant, secant, and cotangent. So for example, the cosecant of 20 degrees is equivalent to 1 over the sine of 20 degrees. If you see a trig function to a power of x, immediately move that exponent to the outside, and everything else is in parentheses. So if this was sine to the third power of x, you would rewrite that as sine of x to the third power. I think that's what I just said, third power. Okay, and then lastly, ask yourself if I should use some parentheses. If you have a lot going on in a fraction, a good rule of thumb is put a set of parentheses around the numerator and a set of parentheses around the denominator to make sure your calculator follows the order of operations.